Our guest today is the publisher of Crain's Chicago Business. He's going to talk about the business of Crain's Chicago Business. Crain's Chicago Business operates the leading local business newspaper and 2 daily news websites, chicagobusiness.com and chicagorealestate.com. Our guest today has been with Crain's nearly 30 years. He has served as a researcher, assistant news editor, managing editor, associate publisher, and publisher. Our guest today is a native of Easton, Pennsylvania. He is a graduate of American University, where he earned a degree in business administration. Ladies and gentlemen, David Snyder. David?
Jay, thank you.
Have fun up here.
Thank you. I'm the only person here I've never heard of. Before I start, Okay. Oh, and Jim Kirk of the Sun-Times is here. Jim? Before I start, just a few very brief acknowledgments of some special people that are here today, starting with my wife, Peggy, who's here for her first City Club luncheon. Jay, if you play your cards right, maybe she'll become a member. Paul Marion, the person that hired me at Crain's 29 years ago, Paul flew in from Washington today to be part of the lunch. The man you all know, Dan Miller, who was the person that convinced me to move to Chicago in 1984, which was the best decision I ever made. My predecessor as publisher, David Blake, who left just a terrific foundation for me to take over. Employee 1 of Crain Chicago Business, my longtime friend, colleague, and boss, Gloria Scobie. And unfortunately, Rance Crain was not able to be here today, but Rance is our founder, of course, our editor-in-chief, and still kind of the spiritual leader of Crain Chicago Business. I'm also blessed to have just a terrific management team who's here today, and nothing we've done that I go through today wouldn't be possible without their support, plus just a great business side and editorial team, many of whom are here, who, person to person, I think is the best staff in Chicago. So I begin my presentation today with a photo not from downtown Chicago, but of Rochester, New York, which is the headquarters of the Eastman Kodak Company. In 1978, the year Crain's was founded, Kodak was the 6th largest company in America. Its market value was equal to Ford, Pepsi, and American Express combined. This next photo is from the Kodak archives. I don't know who the gentleman is on the right, but I know what's in that red circle. And it was the first digital camera ever invented, and it was invented by Kodak. Kodak invented digital photography. Now, this was in the mid-1980s, and Kodak's print photography business was still thriving, and the executives at Kodak made a conscious decision to hold off introducing a digital camera for fear that it would cannibalize its legacy business. And for personally profound reasons, the tragedy at Eastman Kodak is always part of my inner thoughts as we're leading Crain Chicago Business into the future. Kodak fumbled its digital strategy, and we are conscious we do not want to do the same thing at Crain's. So in the next few minutes, I want to run through just a little bit about the history of Crain's and how our culture and values have been a competitive advantage for us, especially during this very challenging time in publishing. How we've seen the transition to digital from print as an opportunity, not as a threat. Why we believe we're at a unique time in the Chicago media marketplace where we can expand our footprints. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention at least a few challenges ahead. Now, what makes Crain's tick? And I start with the number one characteristic, which comes before everything, which is that we do exceptional journalism. and we provide unique content, much of which you cannot get anywhere else. In recent years, we've made a transition to a digital-first technology. We no longer view ourselves as a print business that has a nice website attached to it, but a digital media business that's fortunate to have a strong print publication associated with it. And of course, we would never be successful if we did not provide the appropriate environment and audience for our advertisers. Most of all, what drives everything we do is that we help people succeed in Chicago. And we have a very broad definition of what we view success as. Success could be in the middle of a business meeting and a Crain's alert comes up on your smartphone that's relevant to the discussion that you're having. Being successful could be at a cocktail party over the weekend and you happen to be the smartest person in the room because you read a print story in Crain's the week before. Or you could be on the board of directors of a nonprofit association and sourcing board members, and you go through our who's who in Chicago, or read one of our top business lists and identify a prospect or a future customer. We help you succeed. Now, I'd like to organize my talk around three critical points in our history: 1978, 2000, and then the present, 2012. But first, a little bit about our parent company, which is a very important context to put our history in. We are a privately held, family-owned business that's been around for 96 years and is solely controlled by the Crain's family. Now, I'd just like to focus on two of these bullet points. First is that we're debt-free. Crain's carries no long-term debt on its balance sheet. And that financial flexibility allowed us to have resilience during the recession in 2009 and 2010. We, like everybody else, had cutbacks, but because of our debt-free structure, those cutbacks we were allowed to maintain our editorial quality through those tough times. And then the final bullet point, which is our entrepreneurial culture, which is publishers run their own business, reporters run their own beats, our salespeople run their territories like small businesses. And it was that entrepreneurial culture that prompted Rance Crain to start Crain Chicago Business in 1978. At that time, local business news was strictly the domain of daily newspapers. But he saw the opportunity to do something different. He created a category of local business journals. And you know what? It was very successful. Crain's has been profitable for 31 years in a row, even during the depths of the recession a few years ago. And we do all of this with a small but mighty staff of 55 people. Now, the business environment we were born in Chicago was very different in 1978 than it is today. It was largely dominated by what I describe as large, muscular companies. And in fact, Chicago companies accounted for 1 in 10 of the 500 largest companies in America. And those companies tended to be largely U.S.-focused and deeply rooted in Chicago. And they were known for having bigger-than-life CEOs. I would say that was epitomized by the gentleman on the right. Some of you may remember him, some of you may have never heard of him, but his name was John Swearingen. And for 23 years, he was the CEO of Standard Oil of Indiana, the company that became Amoco. Clearly, he loved the oil business, if you look at that quote. That was the culture we were in. And if you look at our publicly held list, from 1978-79, you will see that Standard Oil was by far the largest company on the list. And that kind of coverage was reflected in the pages of Crain's. Now, this first one, I have to say, was a story I did in 1988. And as Jay mentioned, I started my career at Crain's as a researcher, became a reporter, and I'm not necessarily proud of this, but for several years used Sears as a punching bag as I advanced my career as a reporter. But it was allowed me to move forward at Crain's. As Jay mentioned, I became a news editor, managing editor. I was editor of the paper for 6 years. and then moved over to the business side as head of digital and associate publisher. But Crain's was just the beginning. If you look at the front pages of those days, International Harvester, Santa Fe Railroad, McDonald's, Beatrice Foods. And our business was fundamentally the same for about 20 years. We wrote great stories once a week. We sold ads. We wrote more great stories. We sold even more ads. And then we repeated that week after week. And it was a pretty good business. And in fact, our 20th anniversary issue, which was in 1998, was the single largest issue in Crain's history. Now, who is that guy up there next to Oprah? And it was and continues to be the largest issue we ever did. I moved to 2000. And then something happened. It was the internet. And like your business and my business, probably around 98, you had like one computer in your office dedicated to the internet, and 20 people had to share it. Well, between 1998 and 2000, something happened, which was most people started to have direct internet access on their own desktop. And that was a game changer for us. The daily newspaper industry was scrambling because it was already daily in print. What was it going to be? More daily online? And in addition, they made a strategic decision to not charge for their online content. And that's something they're still trying to overcome and get that toothpaste back in the tube. While the daily newspapers decided what they were going to be online, we reached the conclusion that this was the biggest opportunity for Crain's since its founding. And we introduced our first website. Now, it's this dynamic between being weekly in print and daily online that is such a beautiful thing for us. Crain's would never be in the business of buying printing presses and publishing a daily edition of Crain's. It just doesn't make sense. The capital cost of owning printing presses is prohibitive, and it just wasn't what we were about. But the internet afforded us an opportunity to take the Crain's brand, which is so well known for business news coverage in Chicago on a weekly basis, and take it daily. It was a game changer for us. Now, we were lucky that we continued to have a very strong print publication as a foundation. And even today, despite all the news you hear about the demise of print, Crain's is still successful in print. 73% renewal rate, which by industry standards is extremely high. A very high demographic of business decision makers, which allows us to charge premium pricing for our advertising. Now, shifting to our digital assets, we launched ChicagoBusiness.com in 2000. And today, we have over 1 million unique visitors to our website every month. In other words, we have 5 times as many people having a relationship with Crain's in any given month as we do in print. And again, we have similar high-end demographics that allows us to charge premium advertising. I'm taking a risk here, but how many people get Crain's alerts? I love you. That's a good market share. Well, you're not alone. Every day, 110,000 people get those daily alerts. Jay mentioned I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania. That's 3 times the size of the town that I grew up in. 110,000 people. And in total, we send out 12.5 million requested emails every month to a group of 300,000 people. So some people get our daily alerts, some get other alerts, but our total universe is 300,000 people. So we have this very successful general business news website. We see an opportunity to dig deeper into a few key segments. Jay mentioned Chicago Real Estate Daily, which we launched Several years ago, it is the Bible of the commercial real estate industry in Chicago. Nearly 40,000 people get our real estate alerts every month. And then last year, we started Chicago Healthcare Daily, which covers the healthcare business, of course, in Chicago. And that has done very well, too, nearly 20,000 people getting our healthcare alerts. Why real estate and healthcare? They're two distinctly local businesses. You can purchase law services, banking services anywhere in the world, but real estate and healthcare you only access locally. And that fits into our wheelhouse for local publishing. Now, I mentioned earlier that because of the media environment in Chicago, we do see an opportunity to expand our footprint. And both anecdotally and through research we've had with our readers, we have found that more and more people are viewing Crain's as their primary source for Chicago news. We have that pipeline of 110,000 people like you who are the opinion leaders in Chicago, and we see an increased opportunity to give them news just beyond local business news. An example of this, our Morning 10, many of you may get. It's the 10 most important stories you need to know about before starting your business day. They could be business stories, they could be political stories, they could be international stories, they could be sports stories. We don't care. And many of them are not written by Crain's. It's curated, aggregated content from newspapers around the world. And then, of course, politics, society, and sports. There must be something going on today because Greg Hines was late, and Greg will work on any story no matter what. So there must be something cooking today. Shia Kapos, who's here, who covers society. And we're even covering sports, specifically the business of sports. So you'll see a lot of coverage of the Ryder Cup this week because we know our readers are interested in things beyond their business life. I mentioned earlier this print-online dynamic and what a beautiful thing it is for us. For a few ways, it's allowed us to expand our audience well beyond what we had in print. A lot of our online users are not print readers, and vice versa, print readers are not online readers. But most important, it has revolutionized the way we cover news. This is a front page of Crain's from 1996. And we had what was probably one of the biggest stories of our history, the Kennedy family selling the Merchandise Mart. As an aside, the three bylines on that front page, Tom Korfman, Greg Hines, and Steve Strawler, all three still contribute and are writers or editors for Crain Chicago Business. So Tom Korfman breaks the Kennedy story. We put it to bed on Friday night. We reported the story very discreetly because there was the risk that someone else could get the story before we came out on Monday. It was the longest weekend of my professional career. Luckily, it held and still remains one of our biggest stories ever. Now let's move from how we used to cover news to how the new Crain's covers news. And I'm going to use an example of a story that happens to involve the Merchandise Mart. Now, many of you know that the biggest story so far in Chicago this year was the decision by Google to move nearly 3,000 jobs from the suburbs to downtown. In May of this year, our technology reporter was the first to report that Google was even considering a move to the city. All online, of course. 6 weeks later, our real estate team breaks the story that Google is specifically looking at the Merchandise Mart. About another 6 weeks later, Greg Hines has the story, it's official. Google's moving to the Merchandise Mart. But that's just the beginning. In the old days, we'd be silent for another week. But this was just the beginning. The day the story broke, a story on the success of Rahm Emanuel's recruitment efforts of companies to come downtown Chicago. Also that day, the challenges Motorola still faces after its move. Same day, story on the cost to Libertyville, which is losing Motorola, and what that will mean in terms of the absence of a big employer there. And then, the following Monday, a print package that pulls it all together with in-depth analysis and different angles than we did throughout the previous week. This is what Crain's is about. Daily online, weekly in print, giving people information that helps them succeed in business. And if that were not enough, the following Monday, a story on how the big Google lease could increase the value of the merchandise marked to its current owners or new owner. Let me shift to the present, 2012. What's new at Crain's? What's different at Crain's? So people always ask me, if you have a successful online business, what's the future of your print publication? The key question, will readers pay for digital content? How do we diversify our business above and beyond the cyclical advertising industry, the advertising business? How do we capture a new generation of readers, which may be our single largest challenge? And how will we seize on the shift towards mobile consumption of media? So through the efforts of Michael Arndt and our editorial staff, we are creating a broader, different view, creating a wider gap between what we do in online and what we do in print. Online is our breaking news medium. Print is our analysis, in-depth medium. So we're doing more unique, in-depth, longer stories, doing more investigative stories, doing more long-form journalism. And I'll just give a few examples. A great investigative story we did on how Mike Madigan held up refinancing of McCormick Place bonds, which ended up costing McCormick Place millions and millions of dollars. A recent investigative piece we did on the Public Building Commission and problems they were having with their minority contracting process. A really great story that caught the interest of our mayor. This was called The Parent Trap, and it was about how depressed housing values were preventing young families from moving to the suburbs, which they normally do, and the implications for keeping more young families in the city of Chicago. A retrospective on the fall of Sears. Really nice piece on what it's like to do business in the Austin neighborhood, the most murder-ridden section of the city. Management challenges at Groupon. And then really playing up our franchise features, such as 40 Under 40, Who's Who in Chicago, and of course, our list. Everybody loves our lists. Now, speaking of lists, I want to just shift back to that list I showed earlier in my presentation. It was the list of the top 25 companies in Chicago in the late 70s, early 80s. I don't know how well it shows up on the screen, but there are 15 out of those 25 companies that are highlighted. And those companies are gone, either restructured, sold, out of business. Chicago is a different place than it was when we started in 1978. I mentioned earlier that 1 in 10 companies was among the 500 largest. It's down to 6%. John Swearingen lasted 23 years. The average tenure of a Chicago CEO today is 10 years. And the large companies, which were so important part of our past, and they still are, we still cover large companies in our paper, they're more citizens of the world today. Most of the large companies in Chicago have a significant or even a majority of their sales outside of Chicago. And even though they have a significant number of employees here, it's just not the same in terms of their loyalty and connection to the Chicago business world. A couple examples of the new business community in Chicago. This gentleman's name is Jeff Silver. 2006, founded a company called Coyote Logistics, $600 million in sales today, was number 1 on our fastest growing list, five-year compounded growth rate of 42,000%. The new Chicago business. Matt Maloney, Mike Evans, founders of Grubhub, which is an online ordering system for restaurants, founded just a few years ago, 250 employees in Chicago. Last year, raised $70 million in venture capital, and most of that money came from West Coast venture firms. Shelley Sun, franchise company for home health care, started just a few years ago, 280 franchises in 38 states. Victor Cardelli, founder of Guaranteed Rate, will double in size this year, has 1,000 employees in Chicago. It's Crain's obligation to pool out the new companies that are leading business growth and employment in Chicago. And these people are not household names like John Swearingen. These are people in middle market companies growing very quickly, and you will see more and more coverage of that in the pages of Crain's Chicago Business. Now, just to skip ahead a little bit, key question, I mentioned the dilemma of daily newspapers and will people pay for digital content. And it's been a challenge for them. Fortunately, Crain's, starting 10 years ago, did have a paid model for its website. And that model was if you wanted to read the weekly content of Crain Chicago Business online, you had to pay a fee above and beyond your print subscription or a digital-only subscription. And that worked well for us to a degree. But what we realized over time is that people put as much or more value on our daily news and our daily news alerts as they do our weekly. And maybe our initial pricing model still was a little bit print-centric. So in June, we went to a metered system, and many of you may be familiar with that, is that after X number of stories per month, you have to register. After X number of stories in a 30-day period, you have to pay. In our case, it's 2 or 3, forced to register, 8 to 12 in order to pay. And it's been very promising for us. This graph just shows our trend in paid digital subscriptions from 2010 through the present. And where you see that nice uptick in those last 4 graphs are when we transitioned from the old system to the metered system. And we're seeing some really nice traction on that. To put things in perspective, I mentioned we had a print circulation of 45,000. We're now over 10,000, or approaching more than a quarter of the number that pay online and in print, and it's been very, very encouraging for us. Interestingly, a majority of those paid online subscribers, 60% or so, also have a print subscription relationship with us. So people are seeing the value in both our print and digital content. Now, that's not enough. We don't want to be reliant on the ups and downs of traditional print and online advertising. So there are 2 key areas of growth that we're really digging into now. The first is events. Second is custom publishing. Events, we're online, we're in print, but we also find that our readers like an in-person experience as well. We do about 16 events a year on a variety of topics, some industry-specific, healthcare, real estate, some company size specific, one for entrepreneurs, one for middle market companies, and we're fortunate even to do an occasional event with Jay and the City Club. And it's been great for us. And the reason we're successful in events is that we bring the same editorial sensibility and quality to our events as we do with our print and online properties. Some of our recent speakers, Grant Achatz from Alinea, Dog Klithouse. So you may not know Dog, but who has an iPhone 5 or an iPhone 4? You know Siri? This guy invented Siri. And he grew up in the Chicago suburbs, went to the West Coast, is now back in Chicago, and I'm sure as soon as his non-compete ends, he'll be doing something in Chicago. Jeannie Gang, the architect, Sam Zell, Gordon Siegel, the founder of Crate & Barrel, and Rick Bayless. So we provide an in-person experience with quality programming. Our business model is we charge both sponsorship fees, where we generate the bulk of our revenues, and admission fees. And boy, has it gone well. Grew at 33% last year, and Amy probably will grow at a similar rate this year. The event business is a good business for us. Now, we also realize that we've got some core assets we can lend to other companies, and we also realize that our readers also have a life outside of work. So under David Denora, we've started a custom publishing unit which does a variety of ad supplements on different topics And they could range from cardiac care. Our demo is interested in cardiac care. Investments. This week we have a private school planner coming out. A lot of our readers send their kids to private schools, and these advertorials have been very successful in terms of garnering advertising from non-traditional companies Crain's would not normally get. And then also, this second leg, an important leg of this business, is that we will use our publishing, production, expertise to help companies produce their own materials. Of course, outside our traditional editorial department, but Crain's has a lot of experience in publishing, and we are offering those services to outside companies. Our biggest challenge, getting younger readers. Our average print reader is 54, our average online reader 50. And we are coming to the grips, with, like everybody else, that younger readers are not consuming print media, and they're consuming specifically a lot of it in a mobile environment. But we need to communicate to these young readers that Crain's is something for them. So we're covering more young people in our paper. We're doing events for young professionals. And earlier this year, we launched our first branding campaign in years, specifically aimed at showing these younger people how they can succeed in business. And yes, we are doing some traditional placements at Ogilvy Transportation Center, bus shelters in Chicago, but we're really focusing our efforts on areas that young people congregate. Along the Brown Line, outside the Apple Store on Clybourne Corridor, outside the East Bank Club. And again, the message is simple. If you read Crain's, we will help you succeed. The Romney campaign asked to license this, but after last week, the inquiries have ended. So my last point, mobile. I read recently there are more mobile phones in the United States than there are people. Now, I don't quite figure that, I can't figure that out. I only have one, but some people must have many. But it is factually true there are more mobile phones in the United States than there are people. I think that's probably a trend worth latching on to. So 8 years ago, we launched a mobile optimized version of our website. Last year, we launched a dedicated smartphone application. That means you got the little C on your phone, and you can go right to our website. 25,000 people downloaded that app. But more importantly is the broader trend that 1 in 12 page views for our website are pulled up on a mobile device. And that number is only going to increase over time. Which leads me to my final point, which is tablets. How many people have an iPad? It's the next, I don't need to tell you, I'm telling you, it's the next big thing. And will ultimately be the transition from print to digital. It is a print-like experience for the reader. It is a print-like experience for the advertiser. And it's our future. And probably the most important thing I will do as publisher is launch a successful iPad application, which we will do next month. I'm not taking orders, but it will be available online for $59, and you'll get a digital wide subscription, iPad, phone, desktop, laptop, where you can read Crain's anytime, anywhere. Now, we've not shown any images of what the iPad application will look like outside Crain's offices, but given the forum today, just a sneak peek of what's coming next month or early November. All the daily news you see on Crain's, our specialized sections such as real estate and healthcare, the weekly edition of Crain's, our bloggers. You'll even be able to personalize your iPad experience, where you can pick 3 subjects that are of greatest interest to you, and there'll be a little My Crain's button on the left where you can get the news you specifically want. And then, of course, all of our multimedia and interactive features. So I end with a personal reflection. At the beginning of my discussion, I mentioned the story of Kodak. What I didn't mention was that my father was a professional photographer. And for 36 years, from 1948 until he passed away in 1984, he was a Kodak guy. He captured the memories of 2 generations of families in my hometown, including ours. He used Kodak paper, Kodak chemicals, Kodak film. His blood ran yellow. Kodak products built our house, sent 3 kids to college, left a nest egg for my mother. But Kodak fumbled its future. It went from having everything to having nothing. And along the way, Kodak died. In bankruptcy, headed for liquidation. It didn't see the digital transition. It did not see the opportunities created by a change in its industry. This will not happen to Crain's. Thank you.
Couple of questions?
Sure.
If you have any questions for David, you could use a pen or a pencil. I know that makes one sound like a Luddite, but put it
We'll
on.
also take the live speaking form too.
Yes, but or else you could. When we had the tech guy, everyone wanted to text his question, and that didn't work. So, if you have any questions, obviously it's a private company, so you can't invest after this thing. I know you want to flock there, and as a former part-time Crain's employee, fired by many of the people in this room. Right, Gloria? Here you are, right there. So let's have those questions come up here. Cowards die many times before their death. Any questions at all? See,
Dan Miller.
oh, another guy who canned me. Yes, go ahead, Dan.
I'm sorry I fired you, Paul.
It's okay.
Dave, what are the chances that Crain will ever go public?
Oh, I may cede to Gloria Scobie on that, but when hell freezes over, probably. I just don't see that ever happening. Crain's loves being a middle market, privately held company, and I just never see that happening.
The question was, will Crain's ever go public? We're videotaping this, you know. This is on Kodak film. Anyone else? Half these people are your employees. They're not going to say anything to you. Hines just barely made it. Saved his job by around 10 minutes. Anyone? Tom?
David, what do you see happening to the Tribune?
Good question. Anticipated. Yeah, what will happen to the Tribune and the Sun-Times? Good question. Anticipated that one. Let me start by saying, as a city and as a society, we are better off if we have 2 healthy newspapers in Chicago. So I start with that. Against that backdrop, it is a very challenging environment. A lot of cities don't even have 1 daily newspaper anymore. So the question is can Chicago support 2 papers? I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, the Sun-Times, under their new ownerships, are doing a lot of interesting things. The Tribune will have a change in ownership within the next 12 months. I have no idea who the buyer will be. I think in all likelihood it would be a private investment group. I don't see a lot of people investing in print media companies these days. Warren Buffett is, but Buffett has pretty much said that it's sticking to smaller market newspapers where there's kind of a monopoly on news, and that's certainly not the case in a city like Chicago. So we want competition. It will make us better. I wish I had a crystal ball to say what will happen to the daily newspapers in Chicago.
Breaking our whole format. Yes, Mr. E. Go ahead. State your name first, sir.
Bob Reed.
Yes, sir.
David, do you see, you mentioned the tablet.
Yep.
Do you see that in any way altering the way you do journalism or directly affecting the print product?
Right.
Summarize the question. question.
Yeah, so the question is with the launch of the iPad app, do we see, what are the implications for our print publication and how we cover news? I'll address the cover news issue first, where I don't see a dramatic change there. Our news principles, I think, are largely and permanently intact. I think where it does provide an advantage is the ability to integrate, use technology to make the reading experience better. And that could be by the incorporation of video in a story or a slideshow in a story or something very different. So I mentioned our Who's Who in Chicago, our Who's Who section of Chicago Business. And that's a very nice feature online. But Brian Riley, our head of interactive, is now working on a Who's Who app that will be interactive. So if you went to Miami University of Ohio and you want to know everybody on our Who's Who list that went to Miami University, we'll be able to tell you. If you're a member of the Economic Club and want to know other Economic Club members, we can tell you. So we're using technology to take a great franchise like our Who's Who and make it even better so you can succeed even more.
Hate to say this, David, but the two words Economic Club are never mentioned in a City Club meeting. I learned that from Gloria. All right, anyone else? Going. Yes, last question to close.
David, as an Economic Club member, I'm curious, what's Crain's role in supporting Chicago's success, not only your readers' success?
Right. So the question is what's Crain's role in fostering a business environment here or helping us prosper? Well, I start with saying that, Crain's is written for its readers, not for necessarily businesses. Our readers come first. So we'll never be a Chamber of Commerce type publication where we have a boosterist mentality. But I do feel it's important, and I know Michael agrees, that it's as important to highlight companies that are extremely successful as there are companies that are struggling. So I think our best role is to highlight companies that are successful in Chicago. We're very generous in terms of lending ad space to different business organizations and business charities. But the best we can do is cover the successes in Chicago as well as some of the disappointments.
How about a nice round of applause for our speaker, David?